No, definitely, it's not only physical, it's also very emotional and psychological. There are so many stressors in an earthquake region. That there are, first of all, they are exposed to very violent shock. The tremors of the initial shock are very frightening, and they were exposed to life-threatening events such as collapse of the buildings, being trapped under the rubble. Also, the extreme weather conditions. It was extremely cold there. They were exposed to somewhat distressing scenes, people trapped under rubble, and perhaps some dead bodies. They lost close ones, and they also lost their resources. And they're experiencing very stressful life events right now, and there's an uncertainty about what to do and how the future is going to unfold. And on top of everything, there are ongoing aftershocks. So in this multitude of stresses, people have some emotional reactions that we consider normal, but if they continue in the long term, they can become chronic. What are they? First of all, there is fear. Many people are very much afraid of another earthquake happening again. They are constantly experiencing the aftershocks, and the aftershocks fuel more fear in people because they carry the risk of collapse of new buildings and more damage and more loss of life. And they experience anxiety about the future, what's going to happen in their life, how they're going to rebuild their life, how the infrastructure is going to rebuild again. So this is very anxiety provoking. Although there are some hopeful news about people trapped under rubble, but there is also helplessness because many people feel helpless when they watch rescue efforts. Many people are trapped under the rubble and they are still being they wait to be rescued or pulled from the rubble. So it's just sense of helplessness and guilt at the same time because many people are unable to do anything, to take any action to offer some form of help. So, and some people experience survival guilt because they survive, but their close ones or the people they know, they don't live anymore, and this brings about guilt in many people. I hear from people in the earthquake region saying that I have difficulty eating or sleeping and I feel guilty because others cannot eat and sleep anymore. And of course, anger after the disasters. Anger is very common because of the magnitude of the disaster and the collapse of buildings and loss of lives. People also feel definitely because experiencing an earthquake is very frightening. So the immediate survivors are all survivors in the region, in all provinces. So everybody have been traumatized by this earthquake. But whether the traumatic effects will be lingering or not, it will depend on multitude of factors. In the acute phase, psychological support is mostly in the form of social support. People go there and help other people, offer very tangible support. They help each other to cope with the acute stressors or difficulties of life in the early aftermath of the disaster. So people receiving this kind of social support, they also feel psychologically supported. Direct psychological support is difficult right now because these emotions are very prevalent and they are needed because those people who are traumatized, they need to process certain emotions so that they can evolve and they can enter the natural recovery process. So it is very important here to just help survivors to build their lives in the early aftermath, and normalize the emotions, these reactions, and reassure them that with time, many people will actually recover from these effects. So in some people, definitely, it's going to be they are going to be chronic. In our studies after the 1999 earthquake in Turkey, we screened earthquake survivors for the most common psychological problem that may develop after traumatic events, namely PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And in all of our studies conducted 1 to 4 years after the trauma, after the earthquake, 40% of the survivors had this problem. So it's not a negligible number, but 60% actually they recovered during the natural recovery process. So, but many people will recover, but a significant proportion will need psychological help in the long term. Interestingly, children, adolescents, and adults show similar reactions in the aftermath of an earthquake or any other trauma event. They also develop fear and anxiety problems. They have difficulty sleeping. They actually play compulsively some plays that resemble part of earthquake, their experiences. So these reactions are also very common in adults. So psychological support, or I prefer to say a psychological help should be given in a similar form to adults, children, and adolescents. Interestingly enough, some studies show that older age is a risk factor for chronic traumatic stress reactions in earthquake survivors. So perhaps younger age is protective in some cases. But here there are things that families or parents can do for those children, or children who are left without their parents, who lost their parents and they are taking under care. They should be actually reassured that they are safe and they have people around them that they can rely on. Their parents should convey this message and ensure them their safety and be close to them both emotionally and physically. And also this should be done in care agencies that offer support to these children.
Thanks for being with us. You know, over the past few days, one thing that geologists and seismologists wanted to see was data from the fault line itself. They wanted to see pictures of it. They wanted to see how much movement. Are any of those questions starting to be answered quite yet?
There are a lot of people now, geologists, our colleagues and friends from different universities are now on the field trying to map the surface displacement, surface rupture produced by the earthquake itself. Earthquakes, because it's a double shock. It's not easy because it's a very long, like 300 kilometers. The first one, and the second one to the north is 150 kilometers, and most are covered by snow. They're working and they are getting amazing pictures. The offsets of buildings and roads and fences and fields up to 8 meters. It's something that never had in this country. An offset of like 8 meters. I don't think we had this much of offset in. Following the 39 Erzincan earthquake, so it's big. It is very big, in fact. But surprisingly, the maximum offset, the displacement, the horizontal 8 meter of displacement is observed not in the big one, the first shock, but the second one to the north. Even though it's like a quarter or like half in land, the displacements are much more in the north. That means that that fault had been accumulating stream for a very long time. And so the one in the north, the south that ruptured first was accumulating strain like about 500 years. Like, taking into account a 1 centimeter per year of loading, that makes like 5 meters, which is almost that much now observed. But the second shock, the fault that produced the second shock must have been, holding and being loaded for like, I don't know, 800 years or something, perhaps.